Well, as always, it's really wonderful to be with you. And, as often happens, we come together at times that are sometimes trying and challenging. And this past week has certainly been lots of, has had lots of challenge and struggle in the news, including also in Indianapolis with the shooting at the FedEx facility. And I certainly send my love to anyone who may be close to anyone there who's watching right now. And but also pretty heavily in the news this past week has been a lot of various aspects of police violence. And so it felt really important to kind of bring that to the fore and to talk about that today, even though it's a tough thing to talk about. And I wanted to start with with words from an author, an unknown author, that said, a lot of things broke my heart, but fixed my vision. A lot of things broke my heart, but fixed my vision. I came across a Twitter post by a man named Touré, which he described this week very, very well. He said his post read, "We interrupt our coverage of the protests of the police murder of Dante Wright, which interrupted the trial of the police murder of George Floyd, to bring you coverage of the police murder of Adam Toledo." And it's been that it's been that kind of week. Truthfully, police violence is a subject I didn't want to tackle. It's so big, and I feel like anything but an expert. And I imagine many of us struggle with knowing what to do and how to respond to a very complicated issue. And it's painful and it's hard. But with all that's happened with respect to police violence in our country this past week, it seems like, and before, of course, it seems like there wasn't anything else I could talk about this Sunday. As part of preparation for this, I actually watched the video of the shooting death of Adam Toledo. He was the 13-year-old Latino boy who was shot by a Chicago police officer on March 29th. And the police camera footage was just released, and that shooting hit the news nationally. And I won't share any details of that shooting or of that part of the video because of the pain of it, but honestly, I wept as I watched it. It was a very difficult and painful thing to watch. And as I watched, I felt this sense of everything happening and the whole situation being wrong. That I empathize with everyone involved, with the boy who lost his life and the family, of course, who lost their loved one, and even the officer who made a tragic split-second decision that took someone's life, and immediately in that video then went to offer assistance to Adam as he died. I never watched the video of George Floyd, who died over a year ago, as he died under the knee of police officer Derek Chauvin. The pain of that just felt like too much, and the 8 minutes and some odd seconds of trying to watch that whole video just felt like more that I could take in. I did watch some clips recently, and just kind of, again, in preparation for this talk today, and I felt a bit differently with those. I felt anger at the profound disregard for George Floyd's life by the officers involved, as Floyd lay dying with people all around yelling at the officers to pay attention to what was happening. The officers did nothing but snuff the life out of him. And this week also saw the shooting death of Dante Wright in a Minneapolis suburb. The officer involved claimed that she had meant to use her taser, but grabbed her gun instead. Despite being a 26-year veteran of the police force and a trainer, and despite having her gun holstered on her right side and the taser on her left, she still pulled her gun thinking as she claimed that it was a taser, and with one shot taking Daunte Wright's life. Katie Wright, Daunte's mom, offered some very powerful words that I just want to share with you that I've thought before in other contexts, but she just so beautifully put this in her time of loss. She said that everybody has, and this is the mom of Daunte's mom, everybody has asked us what we want, and everybody keeps saying justice. But unfortunately, there's never going to be justice for us. Justice would bring our son home to us, knocking on the door with his big smile, coming in the house, sitting down eating dinner with us, going out to lunch, playing with his 1-year-old son, giving him a kiss before he walks out the door. Justice isn't even a word to me. I do want accountability, 100% accountability, the highest accountability. But even then, when that happens, if that happens, we're still going to bury our son. This week also saw a lawsuit filed by Lieutenant Karen Nazario after a hostile arrest in December in Virginia and the firing of one of the two officers involved. So a lot was being presented to us this week around police violence. I wanted to offer a few facts on police violence in the United States. So according to the New York Times, in an article dated yesterday, since testimony began on March 29th at the Derek Chauvin trial, at least 64 people have died at the hands of law enforcement nationwide, with Black and Latino people representing more than half of the dead. As of Saturday, the average was more than 3 killings a day. And research from the Prison Policy Initiative shows the United States to have the most violent police force among the wealthy nations of the world. In 2019, 1,099 people were killed by the police in the United States at a rate of 33.5 people for every 10 million. 1,099 people died, 33.5 per 10 million. The next closest nation was Canada, where police killed 36 people and at a rate of more than 1/3 less than that, 9.8 people for every 10 million. Australia was at 21 people killed total in the entire country, and that came out to 8.5 people per 10 million. The United States again was at 33.5 with 1,099 people who died. Germany was 11 people and 1.3 per. The UK was 3 people and 0.5 per, and Japan was 2 people at 0.2 per. Several countries had no police killings at all. A Black man in the United States has a 1 in 1,000 chance of being killed by the police in his lifetime, and is more than twice as likely to be shot by police as a percentage of the population. The data makes it clear that we are an unusual nation. Many more people die at the hands of police than any other wealthy nation in the world, and those deaths are disproportionately Black. You know, I've been thinking a lot of the just a few bad apples line that's so often ascribed to issues related to the police. And I've seen a number of people asking of late, where are the good apples? And I read a story about a good apple this week. Carriel Horn was an officer in Buffalo, and she responded to a call for help from a colleague. When she arrived upon the scene, she described it as coming upon and seeing a white officer who appeared to be in a rage, punching and choking a handcuffed black man as other officers watched. Officer Horn, who also is a black woman, forcibly removed the officer who was striking the black man in handcuffs and began to actually fight him, began to trade blows with him to get him to stop. For Officer Horn's bravery and noble act, she was fired. 15 years later, after the incident, just this past week, she won a court case declaring that she was wrongfully terminated and was awarded back pay and her pension. So 15 years ago, this occurred, and it took her 15 years to be acknowledged that being fired for that incident was wrong. Another good apple was Stephen Mader. He's an officer in West Virginia, and he was terminated because he failed to shoot a suicidal black man. As he arrived at the scene of this man holding a gun, Officer Mader determined the man wasn't immediate threat. He wasn't acting angrily. He had a gun, but he wasn't using it in any way or that was threatening to anyone. And so he decided to talk with him. 2 officers arrived shortly after and then shot and killed the man. Officer Mader was fired 10 days later, and he also won a wrongful termination lawsuit several years later. He was fired because he didn't kill the man. He didn't determine that he was a threat and determine that he needed to kill him. We've all heard of the blue wall of silence and unwritten code of self-protection within police departments. Timothy Egan, contributing writer for the New York Times, wonders if we're seeing some cracks in that blue wall. He writes, the blue wall may be starting to crack. It was broken in the Derek Chauvin trial. It's no small thing that several Minneapolis police officers, including Chief Medaria Arredondo, took the stand against Mr. Chauvin in his trial over the death of George Floyd. 14 officers in the same department signed an open letter last year saying Mr. Chauvin failed as a human and stripped George Floyd of his dignity and life. He continues, maybe these acts of courage are isolated, mere dents in a wall that is institutional and pervasive, but smashing the blue wall is one thing that has to happen to fix the lethal flaws in modern law enforcement. And he suggested a number of ways, including shifting the influence of police unions and training specifically directed at responding to unethical acts, that those could be ways we could deal with some of this issue and this challenge of that blue wall that hides and conceals police unethical behavior. And I think there are also other improvements that we can look at in terms of dealing with the police, like reducing the number of officers who carry guns. A very small number of people, for example, in the UK actually carry guns. And it seems like many things that the police do wouldn't require them to be immediately armed. Standardizing and improving police training, requiring independent counsel to address acts of police violence rather than departments investigating themselves, and adding unarmed emergency crisis services that specifically address mental health crises. So for things like mental health crises, welfare checks, suicide concerns, things homeless concerns, rather than sending an armed police officer to that site, you can send a crisis team that's specifically designed to deal with crisis of those sorts. And some communities have actually started to do that as an alternative to the police. But I also want to share with you another perspective, one that steps outside the normal distancing many of us sometimes do when we think about the police. I think it's real easy. It's very easy for us to kind of sometimes distance ourselves from the police and say, that's bad over there, or that's the problem over there, without acknowledging how to some degree we ask the police to act on our behalf. And I want to share from an editorial, again from the New York Times, by former Minneapolis Mayor Betsy Hodges. And I'm going to share a bit at length with this because it's just so beautifully and powerfully well written. It's a very potent editorial, and it's more than I usually like to share from an outside source, but I think it's still very powerful. And this editorial was titled, "As Mayor of Minneapolis, I saw how white liberals block change." And this is something that I think is really powerful to hear, because often, again, sometimes those of us who might consider ourselves liberals and or white liberals might not recognize how we're part of the challenge and the problem sometimes too. And she wrote, "As the mayor of Minneapolis from 2014 to 2018, as a Minneapolis city council member from 2006 until 2014, and as a white Democrat, I can say this: white liberals, despite believing we are saying and doing the right things, have resisted the systemic changes our cities have needed for decades. In Minneapolis, the white liberals I represented as a council member and mayor were very supportive of summer jobs programs that benefited young people of color. I also saw them fight every proposal to fundamentally change how we provide education to those very same young people. They applauded restoring funding for the rental assistance hotline. They also signed petitions and brought lawsuits against sweeping reform to zoning laws that would promote housing affordability and integration. Nowhere is this dynamic of preserving white comfort at the expense of others more visible than in policing. Whether we know it or not, white liberal people in blue cities implicitly ask police officers to politely stand guard in predominantly white parts of town and to aggressively patrol the parts of town where people of color live. Underlying these requests are the flawed beliefs that aggressive patrolling of Black communities provides a wall of protection around white people and our property." That's tough stuff. That's hard stuff to hear. And she continues, white liberals like me ask the police to do our dirty work, dealing with the racial and economic inequities our policies create. Normally, we turn a blind eye to the harsh methods that many of them use to achieve our goal of order, pretend that it isn't what we've done, and then act surprised when their tough guy behavior goes viral and gets renewed scrutiny. Whatever else you want to say about police officers, they know, whether they articulate it neatly or not, that we are asking them to step into a breach left by our bad policies. The status quo in cities, created by white liberals, invites brutal policing. She concludes, a sustainable transformation of policing will require that white people of means disinvest in the comfort of our status quo. It will require support of policy changes that cities led by white liberals are currently using the blunt instrument of policing to address. It will mean organizing for structural changes that wealthy and middle-class whites have long feared, like creating school systems that truly give all children a chance, providing health care for everyone that isn't tied to employment, reconfiguring police unions and instituting public safety protocols that don't simply prioritize protecting white property and lives. But she adds, and I love what she says here, on the other side of these, and she concludes here, on the other side of these different choices is a better world for everyone, including us. For generations, white people have been trading genuine connectedness in the human family for the poor substitute of property values and perceived superiority. Some may think we have a lot to lose, but racial equity wouldn't be a loss for us. It would be a reclamation of our humanity. That's powerful stuff, and I certainly encourage you to kind of check that out, that op-ed out for yourself, to read through it. The more I read through it, the more I'm in awe of it, again and again. Again, that was the mayor, former mayor of Minneapolis, and whose name is Betsy Hodges. And there are two areas. She talks about a lot of things in there, but there are two areas which she hints at, which I've seen resisted by white liberalism in my very own town, and you may see it in your own town as well. And those include, for example, zoning changes that would create greater housing integration based on both wealth and race. And also educational segregation, which in the past has been at least partially successfully addressed by busing. You know, we all, I think, know the poor neighborhoods and the rich neighborhoods in our communities, and the poor schools and the rich schools in our communities. And it's amazing to me that those things even exist at all, that there are distinct communities that are poorer and distinct communities and areas that are wealthier and more segregated by race as well. And those separations, I think it's important to note, they don't happen by accident. They're very real, and they happen by policy that many of us who are a bit better off may in some ways benefit from. And I think, again, these are tough words to hear. When thinking about police violence, we have to think about our own complicity in that violence. We need to face head on the incredibly unequal society our current policies create, including those that are supported by white liberals who often think we don't support such policies, but occasionally, especially locally, there are definitely policies that white liberals often fight tooth and nail from, including those things like zoning changes and educational issues like busing that prevent desegregation economically in housing and education. And using our police, to keep us safe from those who are angry about those inequities or suffering because of those inequities. I think, though, that there's something beautiful, though, in the mayor's final word, something spiritual even, where she shifts kind of out of policy and practice and steps into the soul. And she says this at the end, just to repeat it: for generations, white people have been trading genuine connectedness in the human family for the poor substitute of property values and perceived superiority. That's just astonishing and stunning as a statement. For generations, white people have been trading genuine connectedness in the human family for the poor substitute of property values and perceived superiority. She goes on, some may think we have a lot to lose, but racial equity wouldn't be a loss for us. It would be a reclamation of our humanity. Genuine connectedness in the human family. A reclamation of our humanity. That's really, truly beautiful and something worth striving for. Shalom, amen, and blessed be.